The Vanishing of Patrick Warren 11 and David Spencer 13, 1996, Solihull. Two schoolboys set out on a cold December night after Christmas in 1996. One was just 11 years old, the other 13. They promised they'd be back soon. But they never returned home. Almost 3 decades later, there are still no answers. No bodies. No arrests. Only grief, questions, and silence. This is the story of Patrick Warren and David Spencer, the lost boys of Chelmsley Wood. A case that haunts Britain to this day. Some crimes scar a community for weeks, others for years. But then, there are those mysteries that linger for decades, never answered, never resolved, and never forgotten. Tonight, we step back to Christmas 1996, into the lives of two boys from Chelmsley Wood, Solihull. Their names were Patrick Warren and David Spencer, and this is the story of their vanishing. It was the Christmas holidays of 1996, a season of joy, laughter, and family warmth. But for two young boys, Patrick Warren, just 11 years old, and his best friend David Spencer, 13, it would be their last Christmas ever seen alive. On Boxing Day night, they left home carefree, full of energy, and expecting to return. They were spotted near a petrol station. And then, they vanished. No note. No goodbye. No trace. For their parents, the waiting turned into weeping. For their community, hope turned into heartbreak. And for nearly 30 years, questions have remained unanswered. What happened to Patrick and David? Who was responsible? And why, after all this time, has justice still not come? This is more than a story of two missing boys. It is a story of silence, of failure, of haunted nights, and of families still crying out for the truth. Tonight, we reopen one of Britain's darkest mysteries, the lost boys of Chelmsley Wood, the disappearance of Patrick Warren and David Spencer. Chelmsley Wood was not the wealthiest of neighborhoods. Built in the late 1960s as a Birmingham overspill estate, it had a reputation for poverty, crime, and unemployment. To some, it was simply the rough end of town. Rows of tower blocks, sprawling council estates, and concrete roads formed the landscape. But beyond the reputation, Chelmsley Wood was also home. Families knew each other. Kids grew up playing football on the fields, riding bikes through narrow alleys, and exploring woods behind the estates. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was real. In the mid-90s, Britain itself was changing. New Labour was about to rise under Tony Blair, Britpop was ruling the charts, and the economy was improving. But in working-class areas like Chelmsley Wood, many families still lived paycheck to paycheck. And in this environment lived Patrick Warren, 11 years old, and his best friend David Spencer, 13. Patrick Warren, known as Paddy to those close to him, was the youngest in a large Irish Catholic family. Bright-eyed, playful, and full of energy, he was described by his siblings as a happy-go-lucky kid. He loved football, loved exploring, and had a cheeky sense of humor. David Spencer was slightly older, more streetwise, and protective of his friend Patrick. David was described as bold, confident, and sometimes mischievous. Coming from a close-knit family, he was known for his charm and for always being seen around the estate with his mates. The two boys were inseparable. If you saw Patrick, David was usually close by. They shared laughs, games, secrets, and that youthful belief that the world belonged to them. The Christmas of 1996 had been cold and damp in Chelmsley Wood. Families gathered indoors, kids played with toys and video games, and neighbors exchanged small gifts. Patrick had just received a brand new bicycle, a prized possession for an 11-year-old boy. He was eager to ride it around the neighborhood, showing it off to his friends. David, a bit older and cooler, tagged along, as always. On Boxing Day, December 26, 1996, the two boys spent much of the day together. They hung out at Patrick's home, played outside, and later decided to venture into the evening. Their parents believed it was safe. After all, Chelmsley Wood was their home. The boys knew the streets well, and it was not unusual for kids to be out late during the holiday break. But no one could have imagined that this night would be the last time the two would ever be seen alive. The timeline of their final hours has been pieced together through witness reports. Around late evening, Patrick and David were seen at a local petrol station. A shop worker remembered them buying biscuits. The boys were cheerful, laughing, and showed no signs of distress. After leaving the petrol station, they were spotted by some friends in the neighborhood. They mentioned possibly heading towards David's brother's flat, not far away. It was a cold night, but neither boy seemed worried. In fact, locals recalled they looked excited, as though they had plans. That was it. That was the last confirmed sighting of Patrick Warren and David Spencer. By the next morning, their beds were empty. Their families, at first, thought they may have slept over at a friend's house. But as the day passed and no word came, worry turned into fear. On December 27, 1996, the boys were officially reported missing. Their families expected an immediate, urgent search. After all, these were just children 11 and 13 years old. But instead, the initial police response was shockingly dismissive. Officers suggested the boys had run away, a theory that would haunt the investigation for years to come. No major search party was launched. No urgent appeal was broadcast on national television. And in that critical early window, when evidence might have been found, time was lost. Two boys, inseparable friends, vanished into the cold night air of Chelmsley Wood. Their laughter at a petrol station would be their last recorded memory. What happened after that moment remains one of Britain's most haunting mysteries. As we move forward, we'll trace how their disappearance was handled, the mistakes that were made, and why nearly 3 decades later, Patrick Warren and David Spencer are still known as Britain's lost boys. When two children vanish without a trace, the first hours, even the first minutes, are critical. But in the disappearance of Patrick Warren and David Spencer, those first hours slipped away like sand through fingers. And what followed was not a relentless hunt for two missing boys, but a series of mistakes, assumptions, and lost opportunities that still haunt this case nearly 30 years later. On the night of December 26, 1996, Patrick's mother expected him home. But the hours ticked by, and no Patrick. At first, she thought he might have stayed over at David's or another friend's house. After all, it was the Christmas holidays. Children often stretched their freedom during this time. But as dawn broke on December 27, Patrick's bed remained empty. David's bed too. Their families called around to neighbors and friends, asking the same question, "Have you seen the boys?" No one had. The boys were reported missing. Parents expected urgency. They expected patrol cars, search dogs, helicopters even. But what they received was something entirely different. West Midlands Police initially treated the case not as a possible abduction or crime, but as a runaway incident. The boys, they argued, were mischievous, independent, and street smart. It wasn't unusual, police said, for children from estates like Chelmsley Wood to vanish for a few days and then turn up at a friend's house, sheepishly returning home after an adventure. In fact, officers suggested that Patrick and David had chosen not to come home. To them, it was not the disappearance of two vulnerable children, but the antics of runaway boys. This assumption set the tone. No immediate house-to-house searches were carried out. No forensic teams were dispatched to the last known locations. No national media appeals were issued in those crucial first days. Time slipped away. To the families, this attitude was devastating. They knew Patrick and David. They knew their habits. And they knew that these boys would never just vanish without word. Patrick was 11. He had never run away before. He was still young enough to be excited about his Christmas presents. He would not abandon his brand new bicycle. David, at 13, may have been bolder, but he was no runaway either. He was close to his family. He loved his younger brothers. He was not a child to disappear without cause. But the label of runaway stuck. And because of it, what could have been a full-scale urgent search became little more than routine missing persons paperwork. Over the next 48 hours, crucial leads evaporated. The petrol station's CCTV footage that might have captured the boys on their last known night? Lost. It was never secured in time. The new bicycle Patrick had received for Christmas was later found abandoned near a local shopping area. Yet it was not treated as evidence, merely noted and left. Witnesses who might have recalled suspicious cars or individuals in the area were never questioned immediately. The early golden window for finding missing children closed, and with it, hope began to slip. Realizing the police were not treating the case with urgency, the families of Patrick and David began their own desperate search. Parents, siblings, and neighbors knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen the boys. Flyers were handed out. Posters with their faces appeared on lampposts and shop windows. Friends of the boys combed the estates, parks, and fields where they often played. But without official backing, without the resources of a police force, the families were limited in what they could do. Perhaps one of the most shocking aspects of this case is how little attention it initially received. Compare it, for example, to the case of Madeleine McCann in 2007, which drew international headlines within hours. In 1996, Patrick and David's disappearance barely registered beyond local newspapers. There was no national news coverage, no TV appeals, no widespread alerts. Why? Some point to class bias. Chelmsley Wood was a working-class estate, often stigmatized. Two boys from a poor neighborhood did not command the same urgency as a missing child from a wealthier area. Others argue it was simply police arrogance and assumption that the boys would wander home eventually. Whatever the reason, the result was the same: silence. And with silence, the trail grew cold. As the days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. If the boys had run away, surely they would have contacted someone by now. They had no money, no supplies, no plan. Families kept waiting by the phone, jumping every time it rang. But no call came. The realization began to sink in: something terrible had happened to Patrick and David. In those early days, the system failed Patrick and David. Their families pleaded for action, but the police brushed off their cries. Evidence was lost. Witnesses were not questioned. And slowly, what should have been a rescue mission transformed into one of the most haunting mysteries in modern British history. But what really happened on that cold December night? Who might have been responsible? And why, nearly 3 decades later, do we still not have answers? In Part 3, we'll dive into the suspects, the theories, and the shadow of one man, a convicted killer, who many believe holds the key to the fate of Britain's lost boys. When two young boys vanish into thin air, there are always whispers. Rumors circulate, theories form, and suspects emerge. In the case of Patrick Warren and David Spencer, the theories range from runaway tales to the darkest possibilities of predatory crime. And at the center of many suspicions lies one name: Brian Field. When the boys first disappeared, the lack of urgency from police created fertile ground for speculation. 1. Runaways, the official line at first. But as days turned to weeks, this theory crumbled. 2 children, with no money or resources, would not vanish indefinitely. 2. Accidental death. Some wondered if the boys had fallen into a canal or construction site and never been found. But searches of local waterways and grounds turned up nothing. 3. Abduction, the darkest and most chilling possibility. That the boys had been lured, snatched, or coerced into a situation they could not escape from. It is this last theory that most researchers, families, and even later police investigators now accept. Enter Brian Lunn Field. Field was a convicted child sex offender, with a long, disturbing history. In 1968, he had been convicted of abducting and sexually assaulting 2 schoolboys. He served time, but was released. In 1969, Field murdered a 14-year-old boy named Roy Tuttle, who was abducted while hitchhiking home from school in Surrey. Roy's body was found strangled, buried in woodland. For decades, the case remained unsolved. It wasn't until 2001, thanks to DNA evidence, that Field was finally identified as Roy's killer. By then, he was already serving time for the attempted rape of another schoolboy. So how does Brian Field connect to Patrick and David? At the time of their disappearance in 1996, Field was living in Solihull, the very same area the boys vanished from. He was known to drive a white van, often seen around Chelmsley Wood. Field had a history of preying on boys of almost exactly the same age as Patrick and David. His known method, approaching children in public, luring them into his vehicle, and then disappearing. The parallels were too close to ignore. After his conviction for Roy Tuttle's murder in 2001, detectives began to re-examine other unsolved cases. And one case stood out: the disappearance of Patrick Warren and David Spencer. Police publicly confirmed Field was a prime suspect in the case. A full cold case review was launched. They searched areas where Field was known to frequent. But despite these efforts, no evidence has ever been uncovered linking him directly to the boys' disappearance. For the families, the suspicion around Brian Field brought both hope and despair. Hope, because it finally seemed that investigators were taking their case seriously, looking at a credible suspect. Despair, because without physical evidence, without a body, without a confession, there could be no closure. Field himself has never admitted to involvement in Patrick and David's disappearance. He remains in prison, serving a life sentence for the murder of Roy Tuttle. While Field remains the main suspect, there are other theories that persist. Local predators, Chelmsley Wood, like many urban estates, had its share of troubled figures. Some believe another predator, not Field, could have targeted the boys. Gang involvement, a more fringe theory, suggests the boys may have witnessed something they weren't supposed to and were silenced. But no evidence supports this. The stranger danger theory: it's possible the boys encountered a stranger offering lifts or money, and were lured away. Yet none of these theories have the weight, history, or chilling credibility that Field carries. Nearly 30 years later, the shadow of Brian Field still looms large over the disappearance of Patrick Warren and David Spencer. Was he responsible for the fate of Britain's lost boys? Or is the real answer still out there, buried beneath decades of silence? In Part 4, we'll explore the impact of this case on the families, the Chelmsley Wood community, and how it exposed deep flaws in the way missing children were treated by police and the media in the 1990s. This is more than a story of two missing boys. It's a story of a system that failed them. For the Warren and Spencer families, the night their boys failed to come home was the night their lives changed forever. From that day onward, they entered a world of endless waiting, sleepless nights, and an unrelenting search for answers. Patrick's mother, Bridget, and David's parents woke up each morning hoping for a knock at the door. Instead, they faced silence. Every phone call made their hearts jump, but none brought the boys back. The strain on family life. Parents describe marriages and relationships breaking under the weight of grief. Siblings grew up in the shadow of loss, sometimes feeling overlooked. Normal life, school runs, shopping, even celebrating birthdays, became haunted by absence. Christmas without them. The timing of the disappearance right after Christmas scarred the holiday forever. Each year, when lights go up and families gather, the Warren and Spencer families face memories of the last Christmas they had together. Chelmsley Wood was already known as a tough estate, but the disappearance of two schoolboys turned whispers into fear, and fear into stigma. The initial fear. Parents became terrified of letting their children play outside. Rumors spread about white vans, shadowy figures, and strangers offering sweets. Shops, schools, and churches became spaces where people gathered to talk about the boys. Stigma of poverty. Some in the media painted Chelmsley Wood as a problem estate. The boys' disappearance was sometimes framed as inevitable, as if poverty itself swallowed them. Locals resented this. Their children were not statistics, they were loved. Silence and shame. As years passed, some stopped speaking about Patrick and David, not because they didn't care, but because the pain was too heavy. The community lived with unanswered questions, unspoken fears, and the shadow of two faces on posters. When children vanish, the clock ticks fast. Hours can mean the difference between rescue and tragedy. But in the case of Patrick and David, time was wasted. Police missteps. Officers initially treated the case as a runaway incident. No urgent appeal, no Amber Alert-style broadcast, no full-scale search in those first crucial hours. Canvassing of witnesses came too late, memories faded, leads went cold. Media silence. Compare Patrick and David to cases like Madeleine McCann years later, the difference in coverage is stark. Few national headlines. No rolling coverage. Families later said they felt abandoned by both the police and the press. Regrets decades later. Retired officers have admitted that if the case had happened today, it would be handled very differently. Advances in child protection protocols now stress immediate action, not assumptions. Nearly 3 decades later, Patrick Warren and David Spencer are still missing. No bodies. No grave. No closure. But their story continues to echo. Cold case reviews. In the early 2000s, with new forensic tools, the case was reopened. Links to Brian Field were pursued, but without evidence, the trail stalled. In 2016, the 20th anniversary, police renewed their appeal, still nothing. Families' continuing fight. The Warren and Spencer families still hope for answers before they die. For them, closure doesn't mean revenge, it means knowing where their boys are. Impact on law and society. The case is now cited in discussions of why child disappearances must never be dismissed as runaways. Today, British police are quicker, louder, and more aggressive in their early response, lessons paid for in the suffering of families like Patrick's and David's. Patrick Warren was 11 years old. David Spencer was 13. They were brothers, friends, sons. To the world, they became the lost boys of Chelmsley Wood. But to their families, they are still the children they tucked into bed one winter night, children who never came home. As we close this tragic story, let us remember, Patrick Warren was only 11 years old. David Spencer was just 13. Two young boys, full of laughter, dreams, and innocence, gone without a trace. Their families are still waiting for answers. Their community still longs for justice. And Britain still remembers the names of the lost boys of Chelmsley Wood. But their story must not be in vain. It must be a wake-up call. Parents, never underestimate the importance of knowing where your children are, who they are with, and what dangers may be around them. A few moments of caution can save a lifetime of regret. Keep open conversations with your children, set boundaries with love, and teach them the value of safety without stealing their innocence. Communities, watch over one another. When a child goes missing, it is not just a family's tragedy, it is everyone's responsibility. And to those who still know the truth about Patrick and David, silence protects no one. If you have information, however small, come forward. Let justice speak, and let two grieving families finally find peace. Because in the end, a society is judged not only by how it protects its children, but by how it fights for the ones who were taken too soon. This has been the story of Patrick Warren and David Spencer, the lost boys. May their memory remind us all to guard our children, seek justice, and never stop searching for the truth. Until the truth emerges, this case remains open, a wound that never healed, a mystery that still haunts Britain. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Backhand index pointing down, tap that thumbs up like button and hit subscribe. Bell, turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Movie camera, more inspiring content is just one click away. Keep watching.